Hello and welcome to the Mortgage Solutions Green Mortgage Masterclass in partnership with OSB and Cotality. I'm Shakina Sawahena, Deputy Editor of Mortgage Solutions. Today's discussion will focus on green mortgages and energy efficiency in the buy-to-let sector, particularly focusing on the opportunities that can be found in improving the quality of rental homes in the UK, and this will all be discussed in light of the recent government announcements. Presenting today's masterclass will be Chay Collins, Group Head of Mortgage Proposition at OSB Group, Michael Davey, Head of Sustainability at OSB Group, and Chris Newman, Director at Cotality. Thank you all for being here today. Before I hand over, just a reminder that there will be a chance to ask our presenters questions at the end, so feel free to do so in the chat box on your screen. I hope you enjoy the session, and I'll now hand over to Michael.
Thanks, Shakina. I will just share the presentation now, so bear with me 2 seconds. There we are. So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Davey. I am the Group Head of Sustainability at OSB Group. I'm going to host a masterclass with a couple of colleagues. So, who's joining us there? Shakina's just mentioned. We've got Chay Collins, Group Head of Mortgage Proposition for OSB Group. And we've got Chris Newman, who's the Director at Cotality. First of all, I'm just going to ask Chay and Chris just do a little introduction about OSB Group and about Cotality, in case you're not familiar with us, and then we'll jump into the content. And as Shakina said, we'll have some time for questions at the end. So, Chay, a little bit about OSB Group, please.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Okay, so just to ground us briefly, like who we are, why we're involved in this conversation. So OSB Group's a family of specialist lending brands. We operate 100% through intermediaries, and each brand serves a slightly different audience and need. Precise focuses on specialist residential lending for borrowers that don't fit the high street, and also regulated and unregulated bridging finance. Rely focuses on buy-to-let, both to amateur and professional landlords, including those financing HMOs and other complex properties. And Interbay focuses on complex commercial and semi-commercial property lending. And the reason this matters to us today is pretty simple. As a buy-to-let lender with a sizable back book of landlords, EPC performance and retrofit are hot topics for a lot of our customers, and increasingly intersects with landlord behaviour, portfolio decisions, refinance outcomes, and access to lending. As a specialist lender group sitting right in the middle of those market dynamics, we see this playing out in real data and real broker conversations, which we'll touch on a little bit later. I'll hand you over to Chris from Cotality to tell you a little bit more about them.
Hi, I'm in the energy division at Cotality. We've been all about retrofit and energy efficiency advice for 20 odd years. We provide tools and consultancy from individual buildings for homeowners and landlords through to large institutional landlords and local authorities. Our tools help them generate figures to underpin funding bids in which they're really successful, set their strategy and manage programme delivery. For installers, we have tools to ensure quality through the PAS 2035 process and the ability to carry out works to the requirements of the major funding schemes. For lenders, we have something called Net Zero Hub for their back books to help them calculate financed emissions, design new products and manage credit risks. We can also evaluate properties on the fly as part of the underwriting process to provide EPC information and cost to SAP-C. All this sort of comes together in we have a digital twin for every domestic property in the UK, and local authorities use that for MEES compliance and rolling out funding and setting strategy. More from me later.
Thanks, Chris. Just to go through quickly what we're going to cover today. We thought it was important to ground ourselves in the recent updates from the government and the release of the Warm Homes Plan, and how that now plays out in the private sector. Now we've got some of the clarity that we needed. Following that, we want to talk about what we think are some of the important considerations for landlords, including the data and information that they need to make decisions going forwards and how they might respond to the new requirements, and also, importantly, how brokers might support them. At the back end of 2025, OSB Group chose to work with Cotality in a pilot study, and Chay and I'll dive a little bit deeper into that. And then Chay's going to wrap us up with some thoughts on how we now need to go about thinking about the challenge ahead, and how the lending market is moving and has already moved in some areas. So the Warm Homes Plan. We had to update these slides quickly last week following the press release, and then the subsequent publishing of the Warm Homes Plan. I think it's important to note that whilst some of the updates are welcome, it absolutely isn't a full response to the EPC consultation that was launched last year. But you'll see in the table below some of the key important points that we do now have some clarity on. Importantly, that's confirmed that the compliance date is 2030 for all types of tenancies. There was an interim date of 2028 within the consultation, but that's been scrapped. So now we have one compliance date, 2030 for all tenancies. Perhaps some encouraging news, but perhaps not so encouraging, is that the cost cap has been confirmed at £10,000. That's rather than the £15,000 that was within the original consultation, significantly up though from the current £3,500. There wasn't clarity within the Warm Homes Plan around the compliance penalties or the penalties for non-compliance. However, within the consultation, it was muted at £30,000, a massive uplift from the current. And exemptions, that there was one exemption that was introduced in the Warm Homes Plan, and that's recognising the need for a low value property exemption, which if it would lower the spend cap, where £10,000 would represent 10% or more of the property's value. So if your property is worth £100,000 or less, you can expect to see some reduction of that spend cap, although it's unclear what that might look like. There's two really important points for property owners and landlords to think about or to benefit from, those being that the properties that meet C now and have a valid EPC certificate will be compliant until their EPC certificate expires. And that's even if a new EPC regime comes in this year as anticipated. Good news. And also that landlords can begin to take action now. All spend on retrofit works to improve energy efficiency can count towards the cost cap spend in 2030. So a couple of good clarifications from the government via the Warm Homes Plan. So what does that mean for the buy-to-let sector? The government has signalled via the Warm Homes Plan that they see the private rented sector as a key part of their agenda to lower bills and create warm, healthy homes that are future ready. They've backed this with £15 billion of investment across the Warm Homes Plan, and a far more challenging compliance regime than we currently have. It's unclear yet how much of that £15 billion investment will support private renter sector homes versus owner occupier, how much of it will be supporting unable to pay versus able to pay owners as well. We'd expect more to see on that over the course of this year. However, we're not convinced that this will simply be a comply and forget action for landlords, and we think that's likely to be far more impactful across the entire rented sector value chain. And whilst landlords won't be forced to sell overnight, they will need to be considering things like maintaining the value of their properties or avoiding them diminishing where they have lower energy efficient properties or properties that are harder to retrofit. We think there's an opportunity around attracting and retaining tenants who want cheaper bills and more comfortable homes. And perhaps the most important consideration point is making sure that portfolios remain financeable, with as many options available at those key financing moments as we can get. We think that retrofit matters right now rather than as we progress to 2030, because the compliance requirements might require investment in the next business cycle or before the next financing event. And that demand for lower cost energy efficiency homes is only going to increase. We think that brokers that are on the front foot to help landlords could turn this into an opportunity. Our latest landlord leaders research told us that nearly half of landlords would really value access to better data on costs and the actions they need to take to get their properties to an EPC C. So they already have EPCs available to them, but they want more, better data and information around them. Added to this, that the latest Pegasus research that was released just last Friday showed that at least over half of landlords have at least one property rated D to G, and that the larger the portfolio is, the greater proportion of those properties that are D to G. Again, signalling there's an opportunity there for improvement and financing. I'm going to hand over to Chay now.
Thanks, Michael. Okay, so this slide's a little bit of the so what it really means for landlords and where brokers we think can add value. So from a landlord perspective, retrofit's not just a one-off compliance cost now, it's becoming a strategic property portfolio management issue. The practical implications in terms of budgeting, cash flow, sequencing of works, and in some cases, planning for voids if deeper retrofits required. Timing's really important. Early action to achieve an EPC rating of C under the existing system can be grandfathered post-reform, effectively extending the compliance window. And if you take into account labour and material costs where they are, it's unlikely that there'll be a cheaper time to retrofit than now. Some likely costs are going to go down, right? So let's imagine a landlord with a 12 property portfolio. Let's say 6 of those are EPC C or above. Of the other 6, let's say 4 are D-rated but could reach C with modest work, and let's say 2 of them are harder to treat properties. I guess the key point there is taking a blanket upgrade everything approach across all the properties is probably the wrong answer. We think the smarter approach is to segment the portfolio, do the quick wins first, plan the D to C upgrades around refinance points, and then make a conscious decision on the harder properties, whether that's hold, apply for exemptions, or potentially sell the properties off. And this is where I think the broker opportunity really sits. We're entering an era now where landlords need high quality analysis and advice around what to do with their portfolio strategy, to understand retrofit costs, yield impact, cash flow implications, and funding options. Brokers who can turn this topic of EPC from more than being just a looming compliance risk in landlord's mind into an actual structured plan, we think will help brokers build stronger customer relationships and increase their share of wallet. Over to you now, Chris.
Right, EPCs have a limited purpose, but SAP is great. A few acronyms there, but I think the first 2 slides I'm going to go through are really important to get across some fundamental concepts. An EPC with the C standing for certificate is essentially a few slides of paper or a few slides of PDF or a digital equivalent of that information. It's needed to be valid at the point of sale or rental. It's a certificate that is useful for quick benchmarking, and it was never designed as an advice tool. It's quite a blunt instrument. Importantly, the recommendations on it don't cover everything that you could do to a building. In actual fact, they're quite a small subset. They're in a set order, not necessarily the most cost-effective order, and use prices that aren't specific to the building. So maybe recommendations is stretching a point calling them that. It's long been popular to bash EPCs though as not fit for purpose, when their purpose they're quite good at for quick benchmarking. So we don't sort of jump on that bandwagon, but consider them a bit misunderstood, including by government. But the key thing is that you need to separate what the EPC is, that certificate, and the benchmarking snapshot that it is, from the underlying energy calculation methodology, which is called SAP. I'm not going to go into what SAP stands for, you don't need to know that. But there's the SAP is the methodology that runs the energy calculations based on a reasonably detailed survey that includes building elements and insulation, heating systems, lights and fans, renewables, and it uses climate data and some standard assumptions on occupancy, so the temperature settings and when the heating comes on and off. It's very complicated, and it's been continuously improved over decades. So what this leads to, the SAP methodology is actually surprisingly accurate for something that doesn't take very long, especially for traditional buildings. I mean, if you've got an earth sheltered home, then it does struggle, but for the vast majority of buildings, it's very good. And with SAP 10, which is the newest iteration of it, it's got even better. And surveying standards have continued to improve. So all in all, it's really good. It's still very cost effective to populate the data. For the value you get out from just what is typically less than an hour survey is really good. It does allow, that methodology allows you to actually use it for advice provision. So as opposed to the EPC, you can put in costs that are specific to the property, costs that are realistic in the marketplace, different occupancies, so you can see if things really are going to affect a tenant's bills, real data, and consider a full suite of measures, not just the ones that are restricted on the EPC. So what it's led to over the years is a data set that covers 65 to 70% of domestic properties in the UK. And this allows what our comprehensive sort of digital twin of all of the properties. And that's really the envy of the world, and more details coming on that soon. So the analysis at that level is going to get even better. A quick side point is that, and something for brokers to speak to their landlords about, is if the landlords are doing works to properties, they should make sure they keep the evidence of those works, especially where the works might not be visible when complete. So examples might be flat roof insulation or new windows, keeping the manufacturer's data, boiler makes and models if those are going to be obscured. Because if an EPC surveyor subsequently comes in and can't verify that the measures, then they have to put in defaults, and those always lead to a lower EPC score. But if the landlord can share that evidence with the surveyor, then they can put that in and use the real values. It'd be a real shame if somebody was at SAP score 68, so just at the top D, because they didn't have the evidence when they could already be SAP C. So start collecting that information, and that backdates obviously to October as well, and before. Okay, the next slide, please, Michael. So what can you do to go beyond an EPC and use this SAP level analysis? What's that mean? So a greater range of measures can be considered. A great example is a normal EPC won't consider removing secondary gas heaters, even though you might have a top spec gas boiler and great central heating system. And that'll get you loads of SAP points for very small spend. It means using more accurate pricing and metrics, so that you can base those pricings on property dimensions rather than sort of ballpark ones that are applicable to any property across the country. And it allows you to include occupancy data if you want to look at if a tenant keeps the property warmer or colder, because it's important, although that won't change the actual EPC score, but you want to keep the tenants happy, because a happy tenant is a longer term tenant. So essentially, you can really look at a much fuller range of measures to pick a cheaper route to hit targets. And you can use more accurate prices and fuel bills and CO2 emission figures. So that's the stuff within SAP. And then there's loads of things outside of SAP that will need to be taken into account as well. On the right there, we've got ventilation and especially damp and mold coming more to prominence with AWAB's law and the reliance and the obligations on landlords to react to that. There's access constraints. So you may well think, oh, let's install a really heavy heat battery, but actually getting up some stairs onto a suspended floor might not be the best idea. Or if you're thinking about installing a new heating system that needs a cylinder where there wasn't one before, but there's no space for it, then that needs to be ruled out. Tenant considerations. Are there tenants? Is it a void? When is the tenancy up? Do you need to plan for that into the future? The conservation area or listing, so that has lots of restrictions on different measures, especially those that are externally visible, PV measures, windows, and wall insulation. Complementary measures and phasing. So sometimes measures might be doing, even if they're not the most cost effective, because they suddenly become cost effective if you're doing something else. What do I mean by that? So if you've got scaffolding up to do some roof works, then you may be a really good, sensible time to do some PV, because you might get it £1,000 cheaper. If you're doing extensive rewiring and getting the suspended floors up, then why not put some insulation in while they're up? Because the cost is actually to raise the floorboards. And then phasing groups into sensible blocks over time as well, bringing measures that can be done by the same contractor together or are sensible to do at that time. Future proofing means even if you're not doing some works, but you're just doing some maintenance, don't block future changes. Or even if you, for example, are changing a rusty old radiator out, maybe think about putting in one that has can run at lower water temperature. So if you eventually in the future switch to a heat pump, it works for that and you don't need to change it again. Enabling works and remediation works. Well, it's rare that you can just do energy works without other works. Also, if you're doing something like redecoration, it's often a good idea to move forward with some of the more invasive works. It probably ties in with a void period as well. And then last but not least, the grants and incentives. The Warm Homes Local Grant does have provision for applicability to landlords. It is only applicable into low-income areas or low-income tenants and in certain local authorities. But where grants are available, you want to be taking advantage of those, as they can give either 100% or 50% funding in some circumstances. Right, next slide, please. Here's an example of bringing that all together and the difference between just relying on an EPC certificate and doing that more robust SAP 10 sort of analysis. On the right is essentially just a screenshot from a real property and the recommendations from the EPC. And the top one there, floor insulation, solid floor. Now, if you've ever tried this, there's two options. You excavate the floor, which could have structural implications as well as being a seriously hard job, or you go above the floor, and that means you're going to have to raise all your doors, you're going to have to move your skirting boards, and you're probably going to have to move all of your sockets to be still compliant. In short, if you can do anything else, do that. This is probably the least likely thing that, you should try and avoid this at all costs. But there it is, the EPC's put it at the top. Then it's got a few sensible measures, and eventually at the bottom gets down to installing a boiler, and all for a total cost somewhere between £7,000 and £10,000. Now, when we looked at the property and considered a much more wide-ranging group of measures and cost specific to that property, and having a human being put them in the order they wanted and select them, we came up with a SAP C package of £1,450, and that sort of speaks for itself. But also, if you look at the package, it's all stuff that can be done around a tenant without having to disrupt them or them leave or need a void. So we found that pretty much always there is an easier and quicker and cheaper way to hit your targets than what is displayed on an EPC certificate. And we used our EcoFurb service to come up with that package. Okay, next slide, please. So where can this lead? Well, the sort of the gold standard, as we think it is a full advice report. Now, it's important to note that as Chay was saying, if you triage your properties, then not all of them are going to need this. But this is over the top end for properties that are probably more larger, more complex situations where you think you're going to have a bigger spend. And it's going to include some really interesting and useful things, a ventilation assessment. So an EPC really doesn't consider ventilation. And if you're going to be doing fabric works to a property, there's a high chance that you're going to improve the drafts. And that could cause unintended consequences of increased damp and mold. So improving the ventilation and having a ventilation strategy is really important. And that's not covered by an EPC. Having floor plans and 3D imagery is really useful for sending to contractors so they don't need to visit site and disturb the tenants, either now or in the future. Even if you're sort of redecorating in the future, having those to hand is useful for getting quotes off site. Thermal imagery, borescopes and air pressure tests are great at finding hidden defects alongside other sort of assessments of conditions of subsidence or cracks. And that all then a retrofit coordinator or other qualified individual can then take account of your budgets, the tenant situation when those tenants are likely to come to an end, access constraints as we've discussed, etc., to put together a good phased bespoke plan that fits with tenancy timeframes, regulatory timeframes, and cash flow timeframes. Okay, next slide, please. I'm not going to dwell on this that much, and it's probably one of those slides that I may have excluded if I'd have thought further about it. But we'd often talk about the difference between low resolution and high resolution solutions. A low resolution solution is essentially polishing that open EPC data or EPC certificates and trying to use the recommendations on that and the small amount of data on it to give advice. So it's just to highlight that that's probably a false economy, that they don't really give you that analytical capability to determine a realistic and cost-effective route to compliance. And if you really want to deploy capital and retrofit homes to a budget with confidence, you really need to be looking at a high resolution solution. Okay, next slide, please. So there isn't a need, especially for larger landlords, to jump straight in and start commissioning surveys on properties and sending around surveyors and getting that data, especially in the near future. We're going to get much better data released on any property that's historically had an EPC. Those larger landlords can start with a portfolio level approach to help them prioritize properties and understand the scale of the challenge. This approach, although you haven't surveyed them, is still really powerful because it doesn't just force on or it doesn't apply those EPC defaults. It can still consider a full suite of measures and use prices specific to what is known about that property. And take into other accounts such as conservation areas, your budgets, different targets, and the landlord's appetite for disruption. So you don't have to wait or commission a site survey. And by running sort of scenario level analysis, you can do what Chay was saying in terms of tranching those properties, and you'll find that there'll be a slew of properties that will be less than £1,000 of really simple measures. So you can carve those out, get a contractor on board and say, okay, let's just crack on with these now and get them off my guilt list. There might be some others that you want to go a bit deeper dive into, get some survey data and maybe have a sort of a shallower report. And then there might be some that are at the higher end that need some careful consideration, either to dispose of, or they might be able to, through that careful consideration, find a route through to compliance. So having this strategic level approach really helps you to come up with plans for properties that you can then work from. And you can probably have a void plan. So in case it suddenly does become a void, you can do some more invasive measures and make it really future-proof. Or if it doesn't come a void, have a separate plan for the piecemeal approach or the smaller items that will get you to compliance by the targets by the deadlines you need. So essentially, this sort of approach starts getting you on the way to having that plan ready to go for every home. So what are my key takeaways? Go beyond the EPC, and this will, using that SAP level approach, will most likely result in a more cost-effective and practical route to compliance. Help is out there, Cotality and EcoFurb amongst others. A portfolio level analysis is a really good starting place for larger landlords. And the sooner you can develop a strategic plan for each home, taking into account regulatory timeframes, tenancy and property needs, the better. And that's back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, and so just to bring that to life a little bit more, OSB Group did a pilot program late last year with Cotality, where we fed into the Net Zero Hub 10,000 of our buy-to-let properties. The right-hand side of this screen, although you won't be able to see the detail, just shows what a breadth of type, age, energy, heating types, floor types, roof types went into that sample. So it's highly diverse and highly representative. And we wanted to do that because we wanted, as a lender, to know what the costs to see were likely to be. And we didn't just want a replay of the EPC certificate because of all the reasons Chris has said. We looked at two different scenarios, one on freehold properties, one on leasehold properties, recognising that they might have different routes to see and different measures that could be deployed. And Cotality applied the SAP10 methodology to the analysis, and that allowed us to really aggregate and then segment the results to give us insight at a calibration that just wouldn't be possible for an EPC, and an accuracy that wouldn't be relevant from an EPC. And Chay's going to talk a little bit about the findings from that. You're on mute, Chay.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so the headline result is broadly the same across freehold and leasehold properties. The median investment required to reach SAP C is about 3.5k, with estimated annual energy cost reductions of about 380 quid. Doesn't mean every property is cheap to upgrade, but it should challenge any assumption that EPC automatically means spending 10k plus, because it doesn't. I draw your attention to the distribution of these figures. So 17%, you can see the spend is like less than 750 quid, probably just get on and do that. 32% sits between that 750 and 3.5k mark, manageable through annual budgeting. 36% sit between 3.5 and 10k, probably needs a bit more thought, a bit more planning, in some cases additional borrowing, and sometimes portfolio rationalization. You have got that tail there that sits above 10k with 11% over 15k, where careful considerations needed there. I guess the key takeaway is don't treat retrofit as just like a single problem. Look at it from a portfolio segmentation approach. If you move us on to the next slide. Thanks. This is intended to be a sort of practical broker lens, like 4 things to take away. First being EPC's no longer a background stat, it's becoming a segmentation tool for lenders and valuers, as well as brokers and borrowers. The simple lens you can take, if it's in A to C, it's financeable, it's flexible. If it's D, monitor closely, might be small amount of investment needed to bring it into compliance. ETG, bit more strategy needed before the next lending event, like Michael said. Second takeaway being not every property should be upgraded. Some are worth it, some will never justify it, and I think brokers can help by helping landlords prioritize which ones to take action on, which ones not to. Third takeaway, I think, in terms of green mortgages, is that they're not always cheaper. I think the real value is ongoing lender access, like reduced refinance risk and future funding optionality are key things to bear in mind. And then the fourth takeaway being data, as Cotality have really demonstrated here, data beats instinct, especially on portfolios. Not all EPCs are equal. In summary, EPCs now, it's a refinance risk signal, and data-led planning beats reactive fixes. Final slide, Michael, please. Yeah, and in terms of what this means for brokers in practice, although MEES isn't final, we can see that the market's already moved. We're already seeing preferential pricing for EPC A to C properties. Some of our brands do that. There are other EPC-linked incentives, like cashbacks. In some cases, lenders are offering 0% retrofit finance or green additional borrowing. Referencing that bit of Pegasus insight that was published on Friday that Michael also referenced, that was saying that 62% of landlords own at least one property rated EPC D or below, and half of the landlords intend to sell at least one in the next 12 months. And only 5% saying that they plan to buy. And I think that gap between planning to sell and planning to buy has never been bigger than now. I think what that tells you is that EPC exposure is widespread and portfolio rationalization is already underway. Like, landlords aren't waiting, they're already thinking about this. And that's obviously driven by a combination of pressure from regulation, costs, and lending access. So that's why broker advice on EPC planning, funding strategy, and refinance risk is really, really critical now. Case placement now really depends on like borrower intent. So if a borrower plans to improve EPC, I think brokers need to look at placing that business with lenders that support further advances, additional borrowing, and stage works, because the borrower may need that. Frame it as an upgrade plus refinance strategy. And if the borrower doesn't plan to improve EPC, consider that future lender appetite carefully, particularly where the property might be older stock, HMOs for buy-to-let landlords, and then other non-standard properties and complex properties. We're also seeing behaviour change. Landlords are kind of skewing the properties that they're adding more towards new build properties, and there's been a lot of change in the market from lenders shifting their approach on new build appetite. I think look for lenders that have strong pragmatic new build policies, because that's going to play into what landlords are trying to do. I think the bottom line to leave you with is EPC's kind of moving now. It's not just a nice to know thing, it's about case strategy and lender access. And if you're a broker listening to this thinking, well, what should I start doing differently now? I would say make EPC part of your fact find, the current rating, find out what your borrower is planning to do in terms of upgrading or selling the property off, understand the likely cost buckets that the property sits in terms of what needs to be invested, and not just the high level EPC cost, but the detailed breakdown like Chris showed. And then look at the timeline and funding and refinance strategy. So yeah, I think it's becoming more front and center for green mortgages, and hopefully that's been a useful presentation.
Thank you all very much for that. I'm hoping that everyone watching found it very insightful and interesting, and appreciated the somewhat last minute consideration of the Warm Homes plan. We will now move on to questions. So the first one, it was mentioned quite a bit, the idea of portfolio segmentation. So, thinking about one property at a time. How would you suggest brokers help landlords consider this? Will this be based on cost, the practicality of retrofits, the potential return, or will it be a case-by-case situation?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm happy to take a little run at it. Yeah, I think what we see, if you focusing on the buy-to-let market to try and give it some frame of reference, if you look at the way the market's segmented, the largest number of landlords are amateur landlords with small portfolios. They're not professional landlords, and some of the smaller segments are their professional landlords. But if you look at it in terms of by number of properties, those amateur landlords might own one or two, but some of the professional guys own quite big portfolios of 10, 20, 50, 100 properties. And that's where I think taking a view across a landlord's portfolio and understanding which properties need which treatment, because it's not going to be, well, let's look at just the one that's up next. It could be that the mortgage that you're looking to place now is the start of refinancing to a lender that will have the appetite for all of the others later. So yeah, I think you've got to take it case by case, landlord by landlord. But yeah, some of them will just have one or two properties and some will have a lot more. And yeah, I think, as I said, data beats instinct. Go where the data is leading and tailor the approach to each property.
Of course. I think Michael wants to jump in on that as well.
No, I was going to offer Chris the opportunity to answer as well from his perspective.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we just, we've built our business on the fact that every property is unique. You look at a terrace street where out the front of them when they were first built, they're all identical, but actually in a very short period of time, properties diverge away from each other. and that's just the physical aspects of them, the heating systems and the fabric and everything else, and any extensions. And then you throw in all those other constraints I sort of mentioned around tenants and the need for other works being taken place, that there is no sort of easy way to come up with a cookie cutter approach without actually eventually getting some decent information about each property and having a property by property approach.
Thank you. We do have another question. So what if the EPC potential of a property is only a D? Will there be exemptions? How they apply? And to add on to that, I would ask, could it be a problem when it comes to refinancing or sourcing lending?
I think that's the potential that's shown on the certificate. That doesn't mean my reading of it that you don't have to get to a C. You still have to spend up to the £10,000 cost cap. Now, if the recommendations on that EPC are in excess of £10,000, then fine. But as hopefully I showed, there's hopefully a way that you can go beyond D, get to C. It's in everybody's interest, yours for the landlords for the long term, the tenants, and everybody else, is to find the most cost effective and sensible package for that property. And hopefully looking outside of the recommendations on the EPC will get you there.
And there's still quite well. If we look at the types of exemptions that are currently within the MEES regulations, we haven't heard anything more about those, so we don't know what the final MEES regulations are going to be. We've just had some headline stats from the Warm Homes Plan, so there will be more to come as the regulations are actually published in their own right.
Of course. And Chay, you did mention to refinance risk, and the idea that people should be looking to at least improve the quality of their property. So do you could foresee that it might become a struggle for landlord clients who aren't doing so?
It could, but I guess back to the point I was making earlier, it depends. It depends, because you could have a property that's currently a D where the path to get it to C is inexpensive and straightforward. But you could equally have a property that's D and it will need quite a lot of money spending on it to get it there. And you'd need that's why I think landlords are increasingly saying they're looking to exit parts of their portfolio, because they're probably doing the maths on that and realizing that I've got to invest a hell of a lot of money here just to get some of the lower rated properties up to scratch. But ones that are on the borderline, I think the data shows that the median cost isn't huge. I think what we're conscious of and the conversations we're having as a lender is we don't want there to be this kind of, if you think about the subprime credit crisis back in 2008, we don't want there to be properties to become like subprime properties. And so yeah, I think obviously there will be the regulatory angle of needing to lend compliantly, but I think that's why it's either spend the money to get them upgraded, exit, or exemption. Are the kind of the three options that you keep coming back to always. But yeah, I think I can see there being people that are left holding properties might have trouble finding a lender to take it later down the line.
Yeah, of course.
I guess we'll see.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see when it actually comes into place. And Chris, going back to, you sort of went into detail about EPCs and their limitations. We do know that through the Warm Home Plans, they did mention some reforms to the EPC, but there's also the standards that a lot of properties are set to. Do you think it's useless? Do you think it has some purpose, especially when it is the metric that is used?
Yeah, I think when it's used for the purpose it's designed for, I think it's really good. It's really easy to find a surveyor to go out and do an EPC if you're renting out property or selling it. The standards are now pretty high. The cost of them It'd probably go up a little bit with the new requirements of SAP 10 because they now have to measure every single window. So in terms of and the methodology behind it is very robust and has continued to be improved. So when it is used as a nice, quick and easy thing for a potential buyer or a potential renter to just get a feel for the energy efficiency of property, yeah, it's great. It's just when people try and use it for other things as a blunt instrument that it falls down. But that's where you just put the EPC aside and go down to that SAP methodology and use that.
Of course. And I'll put this question to Michael and Chay actually. So what is OSB doing on sustainability and retrofit products to support this?
I can talk from a lending proposition perspective. So all of those brands I said are in a slightly different part of their life cycle in terms of legacy platforms and transition to new platforms. And for us, technology is quite a big enabler here of being able to do this the right way. We've already got EPC pricing on both InterBay and the capability to do it on buy-to-let. There's more work to do on Precise for residential and for bridging, but there's a plan to get those onto the new platform later this year. And I guess it's more of just to watch this space. I think that one of the things that we talk about a lot is making sure that we're kind of to be truthful, not just giving margin away for the sake of it. So that's a thing to balance for us, which is that we want to build a proposition that plays into the hands of what borrowers really need. So yes, that's sometimes about pricing, sometimes it's about affordability and access to finance, it's about further advances and the other bits later down the line. So yeah, everything's on the table for adding into our proposition, but we're trying to do it in a thoughtful, careful way, brand by brand, sector by sector. But we've as I said, we've started on Rely, buy-to-let and InterBay. That's where we've put our energy into so far, because we've got such a big backbook of buy-to-let customers. This is a real issue for. So I think trying to solve that is our first priority.
Yeah, and we also recognise that additional borrowing isn't what every landlord wants or needs. So our landlord leaders research that we do every year, it's about 30% that would look for additional new borrowing. The other 70% are deploying different strategies, and we think there's as much value for that 70% in, and that's why we did the pilot with Cotality, is providing them the right access to the right information and data to make those portfolio level decisions is as important as finding the money for the ones that are more difficult to retrofit or might need some additional borrowing.
Of course. And I imagine that'll be a case for many lenders. So also it's a journey, especially as the information and the announcements keep coming.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, all of you. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. If there are any questions that the audience has for you, then you can sort of answer those post-session. And I hope that everyone watching found this very insightful, very useful, and has something to take back to their business. So again, thank you for your time today. I hope you have a lovely rest of the day.